שלום לכולם, ברוכים הבאים לפודקאסט המדע מחפש משמעות, אני דוד אייזנברג, פרופסור לכימיה בטכניון. היום הפודקאסט יהיה באנגלית כי יש לי אורח מאוד מיוחד, יהיה כתוביות למטה. So today we are meeting a very special guest. It's Professor Eli Yablonovitch from UC Berkeley. He's a professor of electrical engineering and computer science in University of California in Berkeley. He's both a famous scientist and a very successful entrepreneur. He's the father of photonic crystals, which is very exciting for me. I'm interested in that topic, and we'll talk more about that topic later. Of strained lasers, a discoverer of the limit for light trapping, and also a co-founder of several companies. Ethertronics, I think, sold billions of antennas by now around the world. Yes. And the Alta devices broke the world record in efficiency of solar cells and holds the world record by a margin. Yes. Broke it by a margin, significant margin. So we would like to talk with Professor Yablonovitch about his life in science, but also about the topics that interest us, which are creativity and human questions in general. So really thank you for meeting with me. And welcome to Israel. I understand you come here quite often.
Yes, I'm a visiting professor here at Technion. Yeah. So it's a pleasure to come here from time to time.
Yeah. So I have a friend here. We're now in the Faculty of Electrical Engineering, and I have a friend who is in the faculty here, and his student won a few years ago, her name is Lishai, a prize named after you. She won the Yablonovitch Prize. And he said that was the only year you couldn't come, I think because of COVID or something like that. So, maybe, so you're here often.
Yes, and when I was very surprised because I contributed a small amount to make this prize happen, and I'm very proud of it. I didn't really miss any year because they insisted. I thought I was a free man. I just wrote a check, and that was the end of it. But they want me to show up every year to hand over the prize. The few years that I missed, we did it by Zoom. Mm-hmm. And but it's quite amazing to see the kids. This is why I was inspired that the kids, they get the award, but then they do even greater things afterward.
Yeah, yeah. So when you look at the career of a person who both contributed to really our fundamental understanding of nature and to making practical things of it, the first question that comes to mind is a question of motivation. You're very active, and I wish you many years of activity. What gets you up in the morning? Is it more, can I pigeonhole you more in a scientist or more in an engineer? More why or more how?
It's a good question, but I think you can be the judge of that. We have many heroes in science. One of the most famous ones is Thomas Edison. And I heard about Thomas Edison once that we use his inventions every day. And I thought to myself, that would be quite a goal, is to invent something that everybody in the world uses every day.
Wow. Okay. When did you have that thought about your life?
I think at the beginning, because as you say, you need to have a motivation. What gets me up in the morning? And I think we have a responsibility to give back to society. So we give back by inventing things that make life better. And I found that to be a strong enough motivation to get up every morning.
Yeah. When you say giving back, it implies that we received.
Yes, and 100% we received. Think about a young person, doesn't know that much, might be promising, and the society invests so much money in training the young scientists. And I have an expression that I'd like to give to the graduate students. I said, if you haven't broken anything expensive, you have not taken enough risks.
Wow, that's fantastic. I hope my students are listening and breaking everything in the lab right now.
Yeah. You can imagine the equipment that they allow us to buy and to use and so forth. It represents a very large investment. Mm-hmm. And even when I was a graduate student, I used maybe $1 million. That was a lot of money back then. $1 million worth of equipment. I was permitted to buy stuff and so forth. And it's a little bit like the fighter jet pilots in Israel. They're young, but you put them in charge of a very expensive airplane.
Very expensive machine.
Yeah. And so it represents the society trusting that young person. And it's the same when you're trained as a scientist. You're given many resources, and the society is trusting that something good will come out of it, but they don't know what it is.
Yes. So you're saying that what we receive is we receive the training, and we receive the funding, and we receive the equipment. But I also think that we are lucky to do that because we enjoy the exploration, right?
Yes, that's right. It's also a privilege because it's every day. It's not like work. It's like a hobby. It's
don't tell them. Basically, tell them. It's our hobby. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So you said that during your graduate studies you were allowed to use very expensive equipment. When I did a postdoc in UT Austin, and I met with John Goodenough. My wife did a postdoc with him, and
he's one of my favorite people.
Yeah, is he?
Yeah.
He was amazing.
Yes, certainly. But also his name.
Goodenough.
Is like, but they can't. It's a British name. Yeah. It has its meaning.
And he told me of the time that he started his graduate work, I think in MIT, I hope I'm not wrong, that he met for the first time his graduate advisor, and the graduate advisor told him, now that you're a graduate student, you have two tasks: to find the research problem and to solve the research problem. Good luck. And then he didn't see him again for the entire PhD. So how was your PhD like? Was it also, how much freedom did you have to explore?
Yeah, it was a lot of freedom, and which I appreciated very much. My advisor was a very famous person, and he was Bloombergen. Yes. And I should mention how I was able to hook up with him. When I applied to graduate school, I was told that, well, for condensed matter, there's an advisor. You go, he'll tell you where to go. So I came to him and showed him, well, I got accepted in these universities. Which one should I go to? And so he says, well, MIT is okay, but you have to have a specific advisor. And so I see here at Harvard, you have Bloombergen, who's wonderful, and you have Professor Tinkham, an expert in superconductivity, as a backup. So you need someone, a primary choice and then a secondary choice. And they were both wonderful professors. And then I got there, and at that time they were making the students take classes, and they looked at the grades, and if you had good grades they would say, okay, you can join my group. Okay, so I had good grades, so I went in and I saw Bloombergen, and he says, you want to work for me? Let's see your grades. And then so he accepted me into his group, and he had a very good system which I tried to follow. It's a little bit difficult to follow. Every year he would take only one graduate student. Wow. And then he would graduate them after 5 years. So he always had 5 graduate students, not 6. He always had exactly 5. And so during the 5 years, he was extremely busy. And so I call it a laissez-faire attitude. That do whatever you want, okay? And when you have results, you come back and you see me when you have results. So
and how often would that be?
Well, it was about a year. I had to have results. You don't get results overnight, right?
Absolutely.
So during that year, I made so many mistakes. I broke so much equipment, and so on. And I did get results, and then I went to see him, and I was so afraid because it had taken so much time to do something so simple. And so I came, I'm so apologetic. It's taken me so long to do this.
After a year you came.
Yes, yeah. It's taken me so long, right? And he says, let me look at the results. These are great results. It only took you 1 year. And so I became readjusted to the expectations. He expected results after 5 years, and then you graduate.
Wow.
And so then I had basically what amounted to already done my thesis work. I didn't realize that. But to clarify, they had 2 years of coursework, and then you start working on your thesis. So it took 1 year in the lab, and I had done something that he liked very much. So then after that, he He says, go do whatever you want now.
Wow. Wow. So the students...
But of course, he said at the beginning he assigned me a project. That's the one that took a year. But so I went and explored and made new kinds of lasers and did all sorts of crazy things. And
CO2 lasers.
CO2 lasers in the early days. They were quite amazing lasers because you could make popping noises with it, right?
Like a flash just with light.
Well, you could make sparks in midair without electrodes. You can make sparks without electrodes. It was a great experience that way. And
you know, the students listening now, because the situation with graduate student projects now is very different. We don't give them that much freedom.
Well, this is a problem. That's a problem in the society. You have to give the not just the graduate students, but the other young scientists after they graduate. You have to give them a tremendous freedom and support. And unfortunately, they have deliverables and expectations and so forth, and they don't have the freedom to explore. And the biggest problem for young people, for young scientists, is the ability to take risks. Because now, unfortunately, this is very true in Israel, is that there's a certain path. If you want to be a successful professor, you finish your PhD, then you go to the United States for a 2-year postdoc, and then you come back, and you have to follow this...
6 years to tenure, the clock is ticking.
Right. And then you can't deviate. And this is not good. There have to be different ways. How does a person in that position where the clock is ticking, how does he take risks? He takes the least possible risk. And then you miss out on the creativity, that person's creativity. So risk-taking is needed, so the person has to be somewhat brave. And also the society has to support you, that if the project doesn't work, it's nothing. Yeah. Nobody cares about the projects that didn't work. They only care about the ones that worked.
Absolutely. So you mentioned creativity, and you say that risk-taking, or the ability to take risk is crucial for that.
Yeah, and this is absolutely not supported in Israel to the extent that I want, nor is it supported in most foreign countries. For example, you have a certain academic path that you're expected to go. It was a little bit easier when I was a young scientist. I could go to industry, I could come back to academia, I could go to industry again, come back to academia again, and that possibility is almost gone now.
Yeah. Indeed, in your career, you did a kind of a postdoc in Bell Labs, and then you were a faculty member in Harvard, and then Exxon. So you moved. But so you paid the price for taking these risks, because some of the things maybe didn't work out, or maybe.
Right. No, I don't think I paid a price. I wanted to take the risks to find out what would happen. So I don't think I paid a price. At Bell Labs, I wasn't exactly a postdoc. I was just a normal staff member there. But it ended up, then I went to academia. I got bored with the suburban New Jersey. So it was a lot of back and forth, which seemed quite natural, and it is not the case now. Let me mention one more thing that's very interesting. When I went to Bell Labs, everybody thought in a certain way. They thought the same way.
About what?
Science. Their attitude towards science was the same. What are the important problems, etc. And but by moving around a lot, I got to meet many different people. So to give an example, at a certain point, I became interested in solar cells. And now there's a wonderful institute here in Ben Gurion University. And they do many interesting things. And I was going through the same process, many of the same projects that they have gone through as well. And at a certain point, I realized making electricity is more valuable than making fuel. And I mean, electricity is just the most valuable thing in society. It's pure energy without any entropy. So, and it had a dollar value. So, for example, a joule of fuel was worth maybe 1/3 of a joule of electricity, because you have to burn 3 joules of fuel to get 1 joule of electricity. So I decided to go into photovoltaics, which was a great risk because it was not my field. And I did in an odd way, as I went to a company. Now it turned out that the company is it's the largest oil company, Exxon,
Sure.
and they were at that time, they were the largest solar cell manufacturer in the world.
Was it for real, or was it a type of greenwashing to show that?
No, it was for real. It was no greenwashing. Nobody was paying attention to greenwashing in those days. They had a company, they manufactured an amount that is, by today's standards, a small amount, but it also, the solar cells cost about $10 a watt. And back when a dollar really meant something, so it's like today that would be $50 a watt, and now it's maybe 25 cents a watt. So the price came down by a huge amount. So it was interesting, but there was something odd about that job. Is I was surrounded by chemical engineers. And I'm kind of a friendly person, and I would ask what's doing, how do you understand this, and so on. And they taught me essentially a PhD worth of chemical engineering, which also included material science. So I got both, and this is a great extension of my knowledge. And it was only made possible because I moved around and put myself in a different environment. And there was another thing different about that environment. At that time, RCA was having a lot of trouble. Now, RCA,
the company that invented radio and television.
Yes, that's right. Led by a Jewish guy, David Sarnoff.
Yeah, he came from Russia, right?
Well, with that name, I don't know. He was a telegraph operator. So he went from a telegraph operator. He worked his way up in the company, and then he got control of the company at a time when nobody thought electronics was interesting or important. Otherwise, they would not put a Jew in charge. Okay, and so so he came and became very lucky at the right time, the right place, and it became the company that created radio, television, vacuum tube electronics, etc. But then they had hard times, and this was in the 1970s, and when Exxon became interested in solar cells, they hired those people to work on solar cells, and they were there, and they were like the experts there. So I learned from them a lot, and then I realized that they think very differently from the Bell Labs people, even though they're both nominally in electronics. But it's hard to believe why it's the same field, isn't it? But the way they approached it was completely different. And I fell under the influence of a mentor. His name is Al Rose, and he played a big role in.
He was in RCA and then in Exxon.
He retired and became a consultant at Exxon, and I was very fortunate I would have lunch with him about twice a week, and he told me everything he knew at the beginning of electronics, because he was an old guy and I was a young guy, and he taught me everything that he knew. And I said, well, this is very different from the way Bell Labs people think. The way he was, because the reason is that he was interested in things like television cameras. So you had an optical sensor, but you had to have the spatial information too. And Bell Labs was telecommunication. It's a different way of thinking.
Interesting. And so you said many interesting things and several valuable things, and I want to put a spotlight on two of them. You said that part of creativity and part of growth is moving between environments, is experiencing different worldviews, is looking at things from different angles. And another is that to find a good mentor, someone who is willing to spend the time with you. Well,
I had my thesis advisor was a good mentor, but as I mentioned,
once a year,
I only saw him infrequently, and so he was very busy. So it's at certain points in time we had intensive scientific discussions. We wrote papers and so on. But with Al Rose, it was a little bit different. It was less formal. My thesis advisor was very formal, and he was from Netherlands, And I gave a talk once at the University of Amsterdam.
I did a postdoc there.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
okay. So maybe you've had a similar experience. And they said, and they took me out to have beer with them, and so they were so friendly. And I said, "You guys are so friendly. My thesis advisor was very formal." And they said, "Oh, he's from Utrecht. What did you expect from someone from Utrecht?" They're all very formal there. And but Al Rose was a different story. He was someone, it's very fascinating. He got his PhD at Cornell when there was no professor to teach quantum mechanics. And Hans Bethe had not arrived at Cornell yet. So he went through, and even it was the Great Depression, and his thesis advisor disappeared. And he did a thesis all by himself. And so he was very impressive. And one day, Vladimir Zworykin came and asked around, "Are any bright young students here?" And they said, "This guy, Al Rose, he did a very interesting thesis on thermonic emission all by himself." So Zworykin goes and says, "Come with me, and I will hire you, and we're going to create television together. We're going to create the whole thing."
Wow.
And so he did that. And but he graduated with no knowledge of quantum mechanics. And it was already 1938. And so when I came to work on solar cells with Exxon, he says, "Oh, I hear you're a very bright young man. Here, have a seat." And he wanted to argue with me. And the argument was that I had a very successful career. I helped create television, and I never needed quantum mechanics.
Interesting.
Okay, and so
who needs quantum mechanics? That was the argument.
No. He says I never needed it. I don't know what it's good for. Okay, and this is already like 1980. So
wow.
But he's very very old by then. Okay, and so I shocked him by saying, "Yes, it's true. You don't need quantum mechanics for almost everything, except one thing you do need quantum mechanics for is the spontaneous emission of light, which is almost all the light around us all the time." And so we would have these back and forth discussions. And so I helped teach him a little bit about quantum mechanics, and he taught me the rest of solid state electronics, as it was understood at that time.
Yeah. So if we introduce your, I don't want to say most famous, but one of the most important contributions, the concept of photonic crystals. You're also the father of the very term photonic crystals, right? And to explain to the audience in a popular way, we're used to think about colors in the way that things are colored by materials that have that color. Something that has a red color or has a green color. But actually you can get color also from structures. If you have the same material but it's structured differently, you can have different colors. And in fact, we find this in nature. The wings of some butterflies or the wings of some beetles and
but parrots, which are a very colorful bird, they have been studied. There was a scientist at Fudan University in China, and he showed that in the feathers of the colorful birds, you have photonic crystals.
Wow, I didn't know that. And you have basically created a photonic crystal, this kind of structure that has this interaction with light, periodic refraction index changes, but you did it for millimeter waves, right? For microwaves.
Yes, that's right. For wavelengths that are instead of light waves, which are in the scale of nanometers, I did it for radio waves, which are in the scale of let's say half a centimeter.
And after you discovered this and introduced this, people started working on this. It was 1987.
Yes.
After that, people went back to nature and found that this also exists in nature, right? This
yes,
kind of coloring.
That's right. It's found all through nature. So people say, I invented this, but actually nature invented this already before. And there are so many, that's right, there are so many animals that have color produced by photonic crystals. And then it became kind of a big research topic. We were trying to find uses in electronics and in telecommunication, which ultimately happened, but at the same time, the biologists were discovering that nature had done this first.
Wow, that is fascinating, because when you went to make this kind of crystal, were you, in that specific point, driven by this practical application, or were you trying to see if it could be done?
Yeah. At first, I was driven by a practical application. The lasers were used for telecommunication, and the laser is a sharp beam. Practically everyone has seen that. But when you try to create a laser, you put in current, and it doesn't laser right away. And you put in more current, and finally it lasers. And all of that current is that, until that point, when it's a laser, all of that current is wasted. It is light going in all directions. It acts as an LED, and it was wasted. And I wanted to suppress all of that light. And
you wanted to keep it in?
Well, just prevent it from even existing. And at that time, others were thinking along the same lines. And that year, there were many papers published on making layers, a layered structure.
Yeah. Which is like a one-dimensional...
It's one-dimensional. Now it's called a one-dimensional photonic crystal. I don't like that name.
In retrospect.
In retrospect, yes. I don't like the name because I want to reserve it for the three-dimensional and the two-dimensional ones. But especially the three-dimensional case. That I looked at the one-dimensional one and says the light can escape sideways. Why are they claiming that they have achieved a valuable goal? They're misunderstanding the science. And so I started thinking, well, how would I prevent light, not just in one direction, but in all directions simultaneously? And I realized just as I needed maybe a layered structure in one dimension, I had to make a layered structure in 3 dimensions. And so I said, okay, fine. And so I said, how will I do it in all 3 dimensions? And I started making lines on a sheet of paper. And I made cross lines on a sheet of paper. And then I kind of squinted my eyes as if I look at it a certain way, it looks like a checkerboard. And then I said, okay, but in the 3rd dimension I still have layers. So what is a 3-dimensional checkerboard? So in crystals,
a crystal.
There are 3-dimensional checkerboards.
Yeah, it's a crystal.
Yeah, but that particular one, that particular crystal was one of the most famous ones, called face center cubic.
Yeah.
And it is just like a 3-dimensional checkerboard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I said, okay, that's a little progress. It's a little bit of progress. And then I asked, okay, we still need to achieve the goal, is to prevent light in any direction, not only from entering, but even from existing internally. How to prevent that? And one of the requirements, and here it gets very technical, we needed a certain shape of the crystal, and it actually the units had to be somewhat round. Now, for technically, I'm sure that you have a lot of. You had to have a very round Brillouin zone. Okay, and this is a technical term, but basically, I realized that checkerboard, the 3-dimensional checkerboard, was the roundest one that we know about. And so, at that moment, I said, now I've discovered something, because I had a 3-dimensional checkerboard, but now there's a reason for it, is that it had the structure had a roundness to it that was unexpected, and that you had a connection now. And so then I realized I had something, and I kept developing it, and so on.
This is fascinating. First of all, I feel like I'm with you in the moments of discovery, and this is wonderful. 2 questions about this. First of all, you use the term Brillouin zone, and
yes.
Without getting into the technicalities, it's a term about electrons and crystals. So it's about the momentum of electrons. This is where it comes from when Brillouin was discussing crystals. And now you took it to the domain of electromagnetic radiation.
Yeah,
it's a shift. It's a conceptual. You're treating light as electrons.
Yes. Yes, that was a very big step.
Yeah.
And there was much confusion. I would explain this to people, and they just wouldn't accept it. They said only electrons could have this property.
Wow.
And one of the things that we teach, this also, we have to credit quantum mechanics for this, everything is a wave.
Yep.
Not just light waves, not just radio waves. Electrons are waves. So, but if electrons are waves, they have this property, we can go backward to the light waves, and they have to have that property too.
Fascinating.
And when I presented it in the early days, people were very unfamiliar with this, and they would get into arguments with me that this could work for electrons, but could not possibly work for light waves.
That was exactly my second question. Okay, you describe a series of, let's say, eureka moments, a series of, but then it wasn't accepted immediately. How long did it take till people stop thinking that started thinking you're making sense? That's
right. It was not accepted immediately, and unfortunately, with many of the things that I do, for some reason they don't get accepted right away. Whereas other people do great things, but then they get accepted right away. So I'm somewhat jealous of that. But that one, it took 5 years for a few people to accept it.
Wow.
And I was very frustrated. Don't they see what's going on?
Wow.
Don't they realize it? And I was very frustrated by that. And then maybe 2 or 3 theorists started taking it seriously. This took about 3-4 years.
And started looking at the theory. So you had experiments to show it, but the theorists took you seriously first. Well,
they wanted to calculate, and they saw that sometimes experiments are very difficult, and it's easier to do the calculation. Once they knew they had to do that calculation, and they saw a flaw in my original structure.
A flaw.
A flaw, and they published that, and then it became controversial. When it's controversial, it attracts a lot of interest.
Oh, nice.
And so that took about 5 years, and then still not as much excitement as I would have expected. That took maybe another 10 years.
Wow.
So it took about 15 years, and then it became like a huge field.
It's huge now.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's really huge. This is so interesting. You know, one of the things we talk a lot in this channel is that creativity is far beyond the eureka moments. Creativity is not just being able to sit in your office and say, "Hey, I got this brilliant idea." It's about actually deciding what to focus on and then pushing out this idea into the world.
Yeah.
And you're saying that you had a flaw and this generated controversy, which drew attention. That's fascinating. And you're saying that it took time. And how did you feel during this time? Were you busy with other stuff, or were you just ripping hairs and saying, "Can they see?"
That's right. It was a little bit of ripping out my hair and "Can't they see?" It was around the time I moved to UCLA, so I had many other things to work on. There's always a lot of things to work on. Yeah. But I have to share with you about how I managed to achieve some creativity. And that is, I've always tried to explain whatever I'm being taught, to explain it in a simpler way. Okay? And so I wanted to have a simple explanation for everything. And pretty much did, and I think my inspiration was the Feynman lectures. The Feynman lectures, you have very simple explanations for very complicated things. Indeed. Because in reality, the world is at some level simple once you understand what's going on. So then you do that, and you try to make everything simple, and then you realize something doesn't fit. Something doesn't fit. Now then you can say, well, it doesn't fit. I'll straighten this out some other time.
Yeah.
Okay. And I wasn't like that. I would say, if it doesn't fit, that's a problem. Then either one of two things is true. Either I've made a mistake, or I've discovered something amazing. Okay. In either case, I have to find which it is. Okay. So it's very common, especially, I'm an experimentalist. If you see something in the lab, I would always know in advance what the result should be. And then if I get it, okay, fine. But if I don't get it, that means either I've made a discovery or I made a mistake. And so this was my way of being creative, is to have a mental model of how the world should work. And if I saw a contradiction, that was wonderful. And how many contradictions are you going to see in the physical world? If you're a trained scientist, you should do a pretty good job and you should not find any errors. And so only a small number of occasions in an entire career do you see something that doesn't fit.
Yeah.
And so I can't say that happened to me more than just a few occasions. And each time it was very consequential.
So you're saying, I'm just repeating this point, that explaining to others, maybe even to yourself, is really part of the creative process, because it's like to boil things down, boil things to their essence, and then see if everything fits, really.
Yes, yes. That is just my way. I think in real creativity, there are many paths that people follow, and they have to follow all their paths. And so don't assume that my way is the only way.
But it's an inspiration, for sure. When you said that there is this, everything is a wave, so there are parallels, there are analogs, this concept of metaphors, actually, metaphors in science is a fascinating concept to me, because sometimes the metaphors drive the science. Sometimes you have this view of a thing and then it drives it. And for example, some interesting bridges that are like, what is the analogy between voltage and water pressure? So when you're explaining electricity, you're talking about water pressure. And in recent years, we are studying electrochemistry in our lab, and in recent years we're very interested in the concept of porosity, of porous materials, and what porous materials do to different properties of the material, like from electrochemistry, the point of how does matter flow through a porous material. And then we realized that almost every energy application you can think of, there is a porous material in it somewhere. And it's quite amazing. Thermoelectrics and solar cells and fuel cells, there is a component or a central component that is porous.
You missed out the most important one, is that
oil.
Oil
From the ground, for sure, yeah. And just by thinking about this, really, as you say, a simple question, why? Why is porosity so tightly linked with energy? We kind of could really come to some interesting conclusions. And one of them is maybe an interface between us, is that there are some parallels between the confinement of light and the concept of confinement of molecules in an electrocatalyst. You have structures that confine a species, if you call a photon a species, and it affects how much you can put in and what pathways will it take. And so, what do you think about metaphors in science?
Metaphors are very handy, but of course they don't all work out.
Yeah.
And so it's another pathway toward creativity.
Also, exploring where do they break is a way of checking yourself and maybe looking at something new.
Yeah, and so you push it, and then you say, okay, maybe I went too far. Yeah,
indeed. One of the things I do here at the Technion, I'm basically head of graduate studies for the Technion Energy Program. There's an energy program, the Grand Technion Energy Program, GTEP. Any advice you might have for future graduates of energy in Israel? Because you were working in energy basically all your life. You started with plasma in relation to energy.
Yeah, early on that motivated me.
How should we be training our graduates for the energy market or the energy world of our days?
I think there's still much to be discovered. From my viewpoint, the most important question, because I had worked so much on solar cells, is it's not that valuable to have a solar cell unless you can actually store the electricity. And so I recognized that very early on. And my colleagues in the solar cell field, they were too focused on the solar cells. And I remember I attended a solar cell conference, and I got up and I asked, there was a question period, there was a plenary speaker, and I got up to ask a question, and basically saying, look, this is fine, there's great progress in solar cells, but what we really need is a good way to do seasonal storage of electricity, which the only real avenue is electrochemistry. And I was very surprised. Through the big audience, people started applauding.
It was the elephant in the room. Making all this electricity, where is it going to go?
How do we make it useful to take care of the mismatch between when we get the electricity and when we need it? And it's especially dire which is absurd to use a complicated word, but it's a serious problem on a seasonal level.
Yeah.
Because it's not just storing the electricity overnight.
Yep.
The amount of sunlight in the summertime, like we have today, is so much more than what you have in, let's say, in November,
Yep.
when it's very dark. Even in Israel, it becomes dark
Yep.
in
Yeah.
November, December. So we have too much electricity in the summer, not enough in the winter. It means you have to store the energy for 6 months. Now, if it's oil, then it's easy to store it for 6 months.
Oil or a liquid fuel?
A liquid fuel, yeah. Liquid fuels, it depends, because it's, some liquid fuels have low energy density.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have, so oil has incredibly high energy density, which is why it's used
Yep.
in jet aircraft. And so that becomes the major problem to solve, and that's why people were applauding my question. So I'm just asking a question: why are people applauding me? And because everyone realized that it was the elephant in the room, and who is going to study it
Yeah.
and make it real? And so, oh, there's no problem. We'll have a storage battery. No, you cannot have a storage battery. That's good for overnight, but it would be too expensive. So to give an example, a scientific example, this one is very hard to relate to unless you have lived in New Jersey and flown into Newark Airport. And no, it was as you look down on the ground, it's one oil storage tank after another, and maybe 100 oil storage tanks, very big, 10 meters in diameter.
Wow.
Or larger. And as far as you can see, it fills the landscape. And what it is they are storing the oil for the wintertime, because in New York, many of the homes are still using oil for heating. Mm-hmm. And and then storing the gasoline for summertime, because in the summer people drive more. Mm-hmm. And that whole function, which is used once a year, adds to a gallon of oil. It adds 1 or 2 pennies to the cost of a gallon of oil.
Around the year.
Well, not it's you're actually selling the oil. Yeah. So you have to charge more because you had to store it. How much more? Oh, maybe 1% more. Wow. Okay, wow. It's almost like it's the interest. It's 6 months worth of interest you have to pay.
Energy interest.
Yeah, and well, no, it's no financial interest. You're storing something for 6 months, and then you're using it. You have to pay you paid the money in advance. You have to pay interest on the money, and it ends up being it's only 6 months of interest. It's maybe 1%, and so how do we come up with some other option? Okay, it's oil. It's not electricity. How do we do that? And we're competing with something that costs maybe 1 or 2 cents. And we have to do electrochemistry.
Yeah.
And we do it once a year. It's a hard scientific problem. And
so indeed, in the Technion, there are several groups, including mine, that work on electrochemistry, electrocatalysis. Yeah. We're trying to take nitrogen into fuels and carbon dioxide into fuels, including aviation fuels. But one of the... In fact, you kind of started your scientific career as an electrochemist when you were in high school. Can you say that?
Yes.
You built a polarograph when you were in high school.
Yeah. So it was I had
can't build one now.
I had a chemistry teacher, and I was trying to. So I was interested in science, and I was doing various projects, and I came to him. A teacher. He was not a professor. He was a high school teacher. Do you think this is a good project? He says, no, that's a bad project, and so on. So then at a certain point, I stopped asking him. And there appeared in Scientific American a wonderful column that no longer exists to the amateur scientist, build your own scientific experiment. And I was a high school student, so I wanted to do it. And it should not cost very much. And it was an explanation how to build a polarograph, which is an extremely sensitive analytical instrument.
For passing currents into solutions or out of solutions?
Yeah, that is regarded as one of the three great analytical techniques. But the beautiful thing about the article, it would cost only $20. For $20, I could build a very sensitive, recognized scientific instrument.
Wow. So you built it?
Yeah, I built it and I entered it into the science fair. And so my partner and I got first prize in the chemistry division. Okay, not overall, in the chemistry division. And we had very critical professional scientists came to look at the high school projects.
The judges.
The judges. And they asked some very critical questions and so on. Yeah. And that was a good experience. And the important effect of that is you carry it the rest of your career. You have that knowledge. It was like when I was working at Exxon, I got something out of my own field, well outside. I had to know about petroleum and how oil moves through porous materials and so on. It's a world of knowledge, and it was very handy because the young scientists, they only knew one thing, but I knew many different fields, so they had a tough time competing with me.
Wow. So you have won a fair share of important prizes, and rumor has it, I'm not saying it to your face so don't listen, but rumor has it that also a candidacy for the Nobel Prize, nobody knows. And I definitely think your discovery is a deserving one because it goes from fundamental to applied everywhere and even found in nature in retrospect, and so ubiquitous. But the prizes are so central to today's scientific careers. And like you said, that you have these check boxes that you need to do, the PhD, postdoc in the US and so on. You have to win prizes along the way and so on. And prizes are very individualistic. And so much of what we do is a team effort.
Yeah, that's another problem. Yeah.
It's another problem. As we conclude the fascinating interview, thank you again. What would you wish to yourself for the future? What do you want to accomplish in the next 10 years, let's say?
Well, I have a project I'm working on right now. I'm going to give a talk on it on Thursdays.
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so I'm not going to tell you now.
Okay.
You have to wait till Thursday. It follows along the lines of that I've been saying. It's speculative. It might not work. It's not very complicated, and it's a new principle for computers.
Wow.
And using physics to do computing. So that is very attractive. It stems from a problem in my department. My department is electrical engineering and computer science as one department, which we have and MIT has, and I think that's good because it cross-fertilizes. But there's been such tremendous progress in computer science in the past 40 years, and especially very recently with artificial intelligence. Yep. That their attitude became, my colleagues said, well, we don't need you physics guys anymore.
We need the hardware.
we don't need it anymore. We're fine doing all this artificial intelligence. And I thought that was the wrong attitude. And I wanted to show, yes, we can have, coming directly from physics, we have new principles for computation. And
well, I'm really looking forward to hearing about that.
Yeah. So it was part of trying the physical electronics not to be left behind by the computer scientists, that they still needed us.
I wish you and us that you succeed.
Yeah, and if not me, someone else will succeed. There are great strides. Now that they've gotten further into artificial intelligence, they realize that they have a tremendous energy problem. That these computations are so huge that they're using.
But also hardware is being developed for that.
Well,
specific hardware for that could do that better, machine learning better.
Yeah, of course, there's always improvements, but then I'm looking for more revolutionary improvement.
Wow.
That is not just carrying on with transistors, but finding a different way of using physics directly toward optimization. So in computer science and in many branches of engineering, optimization is very important. Yeah. Well, physics does optimization because there are many inequalities in physics, and each inequality is an opportunity to do optimization. That's my talk, basically.
Wow.
And so, for example, I'll mention some of the inequalities.
Yeah.
The principle of least action. This is all through the Feynman lectures. This is a very important sprint. And then, what is the greatest inequality in physics? It's the second law of thermodynamics. Why don't we use the second law of thermodynamics to do optimization?
I have no idea. I need to hear your talk to understand the question.
Well, every inequality is pushing a physical system in one direction and keeps pushing it in the same direction. That's what optimization is. You want to make something better and better and better. And
well, the second law optimizes entropy.
Or energy. Yeah.
Or energy.
Yeah. So if you can set up your energy to represent a mathematical problem, then it could be used. And I think by email, did we talk about Onsager's principle yesterday?
No, not in the email, no.
Okay. He was a scientist in 1931 when everyone was interested in quantum mechanics. He found something that went beyond thermodynamics. And it's the Onsager principle. It's also an inequality. It's the one that is now most often published, that is used where a physical principle is used for computation. And the Onsager principle, for example, second law says entropy needs to be maximized. The Onsager principle says heat dissipation needs to be minimized in a system that is driven. So it's driven, it can never reach equilibrium. You ignore it, but Onsager did not ignore it. And he said, no, that also has an inequality, but it's different from thermodynamics.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Okay, the rest on Thursday.
I will hear the rest on Thursday. Thank you so much for meeting me, and enjoy your time in Israel. That's really nice to have you.
Thank you very much for the questions, and I noticed you were very enamored of the point that that God created the creatures to have photonic crystals long before we did. And
he beat you to it.
Yeah, he beat me to it. That's right.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.